Disclaimer. Please note that this episode contains depictions of violence that some people may find disturbing. The views and opinions expressed in this episode are those of the speakers, commenters, experts, and/or hosts. They do not explicitly or necessarily reflect nor represent the channel's policy or the views held by this channel or broadcaster. The broadcaster or its channel cannot be held accountable for all or any views expressed during this program. Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Night Crew. Today I am going solo because Drew is out of town, so we will see how this goes today. So I know lately we haven't covered any serial killers lately, so I thought focusing on Ed Gein today would be a good starter for that. And you were all in luck because I watched 4 episodes of a documentary about him because Google was not telling me enough. And I found out so much about this man from this 4-episode documentary. It's unreal. So I might get detailed, and I'm just going to talk about his childhood, death, the trial, what he did to his victims, etc., etc. And at the end, I'm going to play a little snippet of the documentary that I watched because it focuses on the tapes that were just released about Ed Gein and his interview with police as he's being investigated after the murders. So, with that being said, this is what I watched. So on MGM Plus in September of last year, they came out with a docu-series called Psycho: The Lost Tapes of Ed Gein. The reason they put Psycho in front of it, obviously he's a psychopath, but also because the movie and the book Psycho are solely based on Ed Gein, which I did not know that. But at the end, I'll talk more about what movies and episodes are based on him that I never realized before, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So this docu-series features never-before-heard audio clips from Ed's interviews with law enforcement. And from that, I mean, the documentary was okay. I really didn't hear much of Ed Gein, but they went totally in depth of his childhood and how he came about, how he murdered these people, all this other stuff. So, with Ed's childhood, his full name, Edward Theodore Gein, was born August 27th, 1906 in La Crosse, Wisconsin. And I also today wanted to focus more on American crimes, so we're taking a break from global crime, coming back to America. So this is a very small town in Wisconsin. He grew up with his very, very, very Lutheran religious mother and an alcoholic father, and then his older brother, so he was the youngest out of the family. And also, his parents owned a small general store. And more about his father, George. George grew up in this very harsh life. The story I read about him, apparently he was crossing the river into another town or something when he was young, and his whole family died from this river incident. So he was literally the only one left alive. So with this happening, he was adopted by a different family. And this, I mean, the incident, the trauma, this led to him becoming a drunk and prone to violence. So what I could tell, he would beat up Ed's mother quite a bit, honestly. Speaking of his mother, Augusta was raised in a strict Lutheran family, like I said before, who was obsessed with the evils of the sins of the flesh. She lectured Ed and his brother about the evils of womanhood, evil temptations, and the corruption of the world. So basically, every single day, or every other day, she'd sit both of the brothers outside and she would just read scriptures or read quotes out of the Bible every single day. So she really drilled the religion into them when they were young. So, in 1915, Ed's family moved to another farm in Plainfield, Wisconsin. Plainfield, Wisconsin is very important in this story because This whole town is really solely focused on Ed, even to this day. People know it as Ed's town, where he grew up, where he died, where he murdered these people. So in Plainfield, Wisconsin, Ed only left to attend school. That was pretty much it, because I mean, his mother drilled into him that he shouldn't date, women are evil, all this other shit. So he rarely left. He stayed on the farm. He was very much an outsider, an outcast. So Ed's father passed away on April 1st, 1940, due to drinking a lot of alcohol. Afterwards, Ed and his brother worked side jobs to support the family, or to support his mom. In 1942, Henry, Ed's brother, got drafted, but then got rejected since he was too old to be drafted in the war. And Henry tried to wean Ed away from their mother's influence, but it didn't work. He told Ed he was too close to their mother. So essentially, Henry was very different from Ed. I mean, they were raised in the same family, but they were brought up so differently. I mean, Ed was a serial killer. Henry was just some normal guy who could read between the lines, and he did not respect his mother. I mean, he knew that Ed was way too close to her, and a lot of what she was saying wasn't true. He tried to warn Ed about it, but Ed had an obsession with his mother, and we'll get more into that, but it's definitely like Norman Bates from Bates Motel, where he's just obsessed with his mom, will do anything for her, which is also based on Ed Gein. So on May 19th, 1944, after burning brush on the property, Ed's brother passed away due to a heart attack. They found Henry lying face down with a lump on the back of his head and ruled that he died of asphyxiation, meaning he died from inhaling the smoke from the burning brush. It's speculated that Ed was responsible for his brother's death in the coming years and wanted his mother to himself. So, this is a theory. I mean, a few years later when they were investigating Ed, they figured, yeah, he probably killed his brother. I definitely think he killed his brother because he wanted his mom all to himself. And Henry was trying to tell him, no, you're too close to your mom, and Ed did not like that. So that's why he killed him. I mean, why else would he have a lump on the back of his head lying face down? That just doesn't make any sense. Whatever. This was the 1940s, so I mean, investigative processes weren't as good as they are today. Either way, due to these two deaths, his brother dying and his father dying, Ed became even closer with his mother and rarely left home, nor dated any women, because his mom was his pride and joy. He loved her too much. Eventually, his mother suffered a stroke and was bedridden. Due to this, Ed would feed her, dress her, sleep with her. I know in the documentary it was saying like, I don't even want to talk about it. He'd get undressed and he'd undress her, and then he'd lay in bed with her and coddle her and whatnot. That is just, that's being way too close with your mother. Ugh, that's so nasty. Either way, he had a lot of love for his mother, which is good to a point. So on December 29th, 1945, his mother passed away, which made him way more deranged. I mean, this was the only person in his life that he had an emotional connection to. He never had any other female in his life. He didn't have any friends. He wasn't close to his brother or his dad. So, I mean, this was literally the only person in his life he could trust and count on, and she was dead. So, obviously, this made him go crazy. And I mean, crazy as in murder. So, due to his mother's death, his sole goal was now to resurrect his mother. So he would go to her grave every single day and night, and he would basically pray that she'd be risen from the dead and that she would come back, and he thought he could raise the dead by the act of his willpower and prayer. And later on, the investigations it did come up if, they asked him, did you ever retrieve your mother's dead body, her corpse? But he denied it. But no one ever confirmed this account. So, in my opinion, I do not think he retrieved his mother's body, partly because he had so much respect for her, and he knew if he dug up her body, she'd be disappointed in him. So I definitely don't think he dug up his mother's body, which I'll explain more why I think that theory, because he does dig up other corpses in the near future, so definitely think he didn't do that. But he really wanted her to come back to life. Whew. But also, after she died, this is another strange part. He left his mother's room extremely neat and organized. He left her room the way she had it before she died. And he basically closed off that room and never entered it. So this was basically a shrine for him, where his mother used to enter and sleep. He did not touch a single part of it. And during this time, he became interested in anatomy books, which is so great. And believe it or not, in the coming years after her death, he supported himself by being a handyman and a damn babysitter. Stupid. I don't know how he was a babysitter. 40-year-old man babysitting your kid that lives alone. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's different. Especially in the 1940s. That is different. So, let's see. So, grave snatching. This was Ed's most favorite thing to do, quite frankly. Just disgusting, but you know how it goes. Ed's first grave snatching began with Adam's, whose grave was a mere 12 feet from his mother's grave. Following this, Ed would read about funerals in the newspaper, and he would dig up their bodies the next day or even that same night. Some bodies he would take home, and others he would open their casket, cut off their body parts, and just leave them there. Put the dirt back in the hole. So, this is the early stage of grave snatching and having an obsession with dead bodies. And at the end of the documentary, they said he dug up about 9 to 11 corpses from graves. But the thing was, they never certified that. They never found out what graves he actually took from, which is so messed up. Like, wouldn't you want to know what graves he took from, especially body parts? It's just so weird. But yeah, that's still questionable to this day, but I mean, you can't do anything now. That was so long ago. Their corpses are skeletons now. So, let's start with Ed's 2 murders. Only 2 murders. It's still horrible, but the beginning of Ed's killings began with the 54-year-old tavern owner, Mary Hogan. Ed stated that Mary represented the opposite of his mother since she was so corrupt. And by corrupt, she was an older woman. His mother was an older woman. Ed's mother was very religious. Mary, another older woman, would swear all the time. She'd make these slurs, and I mean, she's a bar owner. She was definitely the total opposite of his mother, which he only killed women that represented his mother. Don't know why he chose the opposite, but in this case, he did. So, on December 8th, 1954, at 8 p.m., Ed murdered her. So upon arrival of the tavern, this is what police found, by the way. Once I got there were overturned chairs, bullet casings, and bloodstains. And Ed would not admit to killing her until they found Mary's head in a plastic bag within his home. Essentially, So, they found her head in a very strange way. found her head in a box, but it didn't have a skull. It was literally just her embalmed face, meaning let me re-explain. He cut off her face attached with her hair. He let that dry, and he made a mask out of it. That is what he did with her head. And he would not admit to killing her until they found this. This is what he always does in the investigation. They ask him, like, okay, did you murder her? Well, I guess so. Like, he would never fully admit it. It makes me so upset. But either way, his second murder. On November 16th, 1957, Bernice Warden, 58 years old, welcomed Ed Gein into her hardware store. So the two had some history, because Ed asked her if she knew how to roller skate. And she's like, no, I've never been roller skating. And Ed was like, well, you should come with me and teach me how to roller skate. So he's basically asking her on a date. And for what I found out, it sounded like she denied him. So that didn't go well. But I mean, it's not like they were enemies. They were acquaintances. So once Ed got into Bernice's hardware store, which in her hardware store, they really sell farming equipment and tools. And they have a bunch of rifles in the back of the store. So Ed asks Bernice where the rifles were, and she directs them to the back of the store, where they all are, stacked up. So as Bernice is looking out the window of her store, looking across the street at a gas station, Ed pulled a bullet out of his front pocket and shot her with one of the rifles that were there. And after shooting her, he dragged her body into a truck and drove to his farmhouse. Once there, he left her body there. He walked 6 miles back into town and retrieved his own car. So, I don't know what he was thinking. He's just like, oh no, I forgot my own car. Oh no. It's just, it makes no sense. He took her own damn truck. The one with the Warden's Hardware Store name on it. Like, really? Or Warden's Hardware Store. That's probably why he got his own car. So, upon investigation of the store after the murder happened, they found that the cash register was missing. There was a receipt for antifreeze on the counter, which the whole antifreeze thing, I don't know how this really came into the story, but they were saying Ed came into the store the following day, and obviously it was a different cashier. It was a male. And he asked him if he had any antifreeze. And he said, yeah. He left without it. Well, like, okay. And then he came back the next day. Oh, I guess he was waiting for Bernice, now that I think about it. Anyways, a receipt for antifreeze was on the counter. There was .22 caliber shell casings on the floor. And a trail of blood led out the back from where he dragged her body out into her truck in the back. So Bernice's son, a deputy sheriff, was already suspicious of Ed and was soon apprehended. So they arrested Ed, I believe that same night, because Ed was at a neighbor's house having dinner, and the police just show up and they're like, yeah, you're arrested, you killed Bernice. So yeah, having dinner and all. So that same night, while Ed is at his neighbor's house enjoying dinner, authorities decide to go to Ed's house, but he wasn't there. He's at his neighbor's house. So they decide, okay, well, we can't get into his house, but the woodshed is open and that connects to his house. So upon coming the woodshed, there were no lights in there. But authorities could see Bernice Warden's headless, gutless, naked corpse strung up by her heels. The autopsy read that she was hanging from the roof bars and was decapitated and eviscerated. So, basically, Ed, this whole thing about murdering her, he told the authorities that he thought he was deer hunting when he was gutting her and taking off her head pretty much. But the thing, the ironic thing is, the authorities found out he's literally never been deer hunting before. So he's just lying during the investigation. Don't know why he would say that. But either way, he basically had this pulley system, tied her heels to it, pulled up the thing, and she was just hanging there like a gutless pig or whatever. And, I mean, obviously they didn't know where her head was. They found her head in a sack, her heart in a plastic bag, and her vulva in a box, which he had a box of vulvas, unfortunately. Interestingly enough, after he murdered Bernice, he went to his neighbor's house. This is so gross. He went to his neighbor's house and offered them deer meat. That's what he was at his neighbor's house for. And it turns out he was offering his neighbors human flesh from skinning Bernice. This man was batshit crazy. Who would go to your neighbor's house and offer them human flesh? I'm sure they ate it too, because like, oh, deer meat, yum. Ugh, that's so nasty. I can't believe he did that. But either way, yeah, he thought he was gutting a deer. Obviously, that's not a deer. So, this opened a whole can of worms. They searched more of his home, and the stuff they found in here, you can look up crime scene photos. There's a lot of websites. Reddit always has graphic ones, but Reddit is a great resource to use. So they found skulls used as soup bowls, skulls placed on the ends of his bedposts, human bones in the oven that he was drying, a human heart in a frying pan on the stove, which, side note, he never admitted to eating any of his victims, even the corpses. But I mean, why else would you have a human heart in a frying pan on the stove if you're not going to eat it? That just makes no sense. He definitely ate these people. He definitely he essayed them. So there's no doubt about that. So human heart in frying pan. He had a box of vulvas with ribbons wrapped around them. If you don't know what a vulva is, it's human genitals with ribbons wrapped around them. Why? I don't know. He's a very strange man. And one of the worser things he had was a skin suit he made. So basically, he sewed this suit together made entirely out of real human flesh. And the reason he did it was because he wanted to be more intimate with his mother while wearing the suit. And also, he wanted to become a woman because I guess apparently in his childhood he would dress up a lot and he would always talk about how he wanted to become a woman and everything. So just imagine this man putting on a skin suit, walking around his house because he wants to feel close to his mother. But that's not all. There was organs in jars and a belt made from human nipples. I think he had a few of those because I saw a few pictures of those. He literally made a belt of human nipples tied together. But that's not it. Law enforcement found human skin fashioned as lampshades. So, the pictures I saw of this with the lampshade thing, it would either, the actual lampshade part would either be a human face or it'd just be skin, the shape of a lampshade. And he also had human skin upholstery on his chair and couch. So, he would sew in human skin into his chairs and couches so he can sit on them, be close with his victims, I guess, something like that. And he would also construct masks out of the skin from the skulls he dug up and would put them on his face. This is where Leatherface comes in from, or Texas Chainsaw Massacre. See, I never put two and two together until I researched this. Yeah, so that's what he did. He would literally take off their face, make it into a mask, and wear it. That's the history behind Leatherface, so hopefully you're as scarred as I am now. So essentially, he wanted to wear someone else's skin, especially his mother's. And just a little tidbit more. One of the county sheriffs who was searching Ed's house was there for 6 hours. And he was so messed up from this. He just couldn't believe how disgusting and vile and gruesome this whole thing was. So he went to jail. He went to the jail where Ed was and he attacked him in his jail cell. And the next day, Ed was like, oh my gosh, this deputy came and attacked me. Well, no shit. You just did something horrible. So, either way, we're going into the investigation / the trial. So this whole questioning part was very, very interesting. So, while being questioned, Ed admitted to killing Bernice and Mary. He stated he shot both women who resembled his mother, like I said earlier. Also, he admitted to digging up several corpses, 9 to 11 of them, to cut off body parts, practice necrophilia, and fashion suits and masks out of skin to wear around the house. Ed, however, never admitted to having sexual relationships nor eating his victims, like I said earlier. Now that I call bullshit. There's no way he didn't do neither of those things to these corpses by how his behavior is. And, I mean, he was very sexual with the body parts, the nipples and the vulvas. Like, he definitely did something to them. He definitely had a sexual fantasy. So he definitely had necrophilia. No doubt. I don't doubt he didn't eat them either. He definitely ate them. So with this evidence, authorities attempted to link him to other disappearances and murders, but couldn't come to any conclusions. So it was really the two murders they could get him on. And during questioning, really, Ed showed little to no emotion. He wasn't overly defensive or nervous. He was pretty calm, and he wasn't angry or annoyed either. He stated when he would conduct these murders or dig up the corpses, he would go into the state of amnesia and couldn't remember anything at all. Which, they talked about this in the documentary. A lot of serial killers go through this state of amnesia when they're killing someone. They can't remember anything. It's not just for the sake of the legality of it, saving themselves from incriminating themselves, but it's also they just really don't remember what they did because it was so traumatic. I mean, as a person, that's just very traumatic to go through. So, in March 1958, Ed's farmhouse mysteriously burned down, despite the site being turned into a museum. Can you believe these people wanted to make this damn house a museum? I mean, they never figured out who burned the house. Obviously, it wasn't Ed, but maybe it was someone Ed knew. Maybe he told them, please burn it down so they don't see what I did to these. I don't even know. Either way, it's just weird. I mean, it's speculated that the fire was set intentionally, but like I said, a cause was never determined for that. That was done on purpose, I know that. In January 1958, Ed's lawyer entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. Ed was found unfit to stand trial after being diagnosed with schizophrenia. Soon after he was diagnosed, he was sent to the Central State Hospital in Wisconsin. This is a part that's weird. Basically, the reason he was unfit to stand trial was because of the gruesome nature of his case, and no one's ever heard of that before. It turns out he really he wasn't insane. He was coherent. I mean, in the evaluation in the hospital, it said he was coherent yet illogical. And then he would experience physical and auditory illusions, especially of his mother's voice. But then he denied any sexual relationships with any of the corpses that he dug up, since he said they smelled too bad to do that with. He was definitely coherent during this trial. The judge was just, I think he was just scared and shocked. Like, what do I do? This crime is so unique and gruesome. I mean, I would think he would be insane too. But, I mean, a little fact about when he was at the state hospital, he worked as a medical center aide, a mason, and a carpenter's assistant. In 1968, Ed was finally determined to fit to stand trial. It turns out Ed was always competent to stand trial, but due to the gruesome nature of this case, the judge assumed he was insane, like I said earlier. He was found guilty of Bernice's murder. However, he was also found insane at the time of murder and was recommitted to the Central State Hospital. So, either way, they found him insane. Which, I mean, he could have had schizophrenia. I mean, if he was diagnosed with it, if he's seeing things, that's one thing. But I definitely think he was competent enough to know good from wrong, right from wrong. But, I mean, either way, I mean, this is 1950s, 1960s. A lot. I mean, even back then, it took 20 years after that to determine what a serial killer even was. So, I mean, they were still researching stuff, figuring out psychology back then too. In reality, Ed knew what he was doing and couldn't plead insanity. Following the trial, all the body parts found in Ed's possession were placed in a mass grave. It was said he dug up 9 to 11 graves, as I said earlier, and the authorities never found out who was missing from the graves. I just think it's messed up how they put all the body parts in this mass grave. I just at least know where they came from, who the victims were. Don't just put them in a damn grave. And I mean, it's really an unmarked grave too. There's a tombstone, but I mean, they're just all Jane Does pretty much, which is so sad. So after petitioning for a release in 1974, which was rejected, Ed made no news while institutionalized. But they made several movies about him, but I'll get into that in a little bit. So the death of Ed. In the late 1970s, Ed's health was pretty terrible and he had bad dementia, so he was sent to a different mental health institute in Madison, Wisconsin. The whole time he was there, he never caused any violence. People said he was a model patient. He never caused code reds, anything like that. He was pretty chill, honestly, the whole time. He ended up dying from lung cancer and respiratory issues on July 26, 1984. He was 77 years old. So he lived a pretty long life. So, of course, Ed was buried in Plainfield, Wisconsin, next to his mother and his father. But his grave became a tourist attraction. Some visitors would chip off pieces of his grave just as a souvenir. And people do the same to his mother's grave too. If you look at pictures of her grave, there's pieces of it chipped off. It's more round than rectangular anymore. And in June 2000, the entire gravestone was stolen. It was speculated that an occult group stole it, but it was eventually found a year later. And then the cemetery board member placed it in their basement where it still stands today. I mean, they were going to bury it somewhere, but I mean, his tombstone remains in storage and his gravesite is still unmarked. But it's in between his mother and father's grave, right in the middle of it. So, this last part we're going to be talking about. Movies inspired by Ed Gein. I love horror movies, but I'm I'm not cultured in the old horror movies except Texas Chainsaw Massacre. That is the only one I've seen, and Bates Motel out of this list. Before we get to that, some of the nicknames given to Ed were the Butcher of Plainfield, Plainfield Ghoul, and the Grandfather of Gore. And another fact, those who read about Ed and became interested in this story were called Geiners. Never knew that was a thing. Weird. But anyways, Ed inspired several movies and novels like Psycho in 1960, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Leatherface in 1974, The Silence of the Lambs, 1991, Bates Motel. Well, Psycho and Bates Motel are kind of the same, but Bates Motel is another show that's newer that talks about Norman Bates. And then Deranged, which came out in 1974. Ed Gein, that came out in 2000. House of a Thousand Corpses, 2003. And The Devil's Rejects in 2005. So like I said earlier, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, released in the 70s, it's based on Ed Gein's home, just the disarray, disorganization of his whole home, and it focuses on using human skin as a mask for Leatherface, just as Ed wore human skin as his mask. In the movie Psycho, there's parts of it that I picked out, but in Psycho, there is a room that's entirely preserved, just like Ed's mother's room. And obviously, Norman Bates is obsessed with his mother and loves taxidermy. And just a little fun fact that I found out watching this documentary, this book only took 7 weeks to write, and the movie was released 2 years after Ed's crimes were uncovered. So Ed was very famous, especially in 1960s, 70s when he was still alive. He knew what he was doing. He said, I am famous. But either way, I have a little snippet from the documentary, and it kind of goes into just how messed up everything is, and it kind of... So when Ed starts to talk, it's usually the investigator, and then Ed's voice is very quiet, so it's hard to hear even on my laptop, but we're gonna try it anyways. Here we go.
No one knew of the existence of this tape. I mean, this casts a whole new light on the Gein case. It's the whole context.
Then what would you do with the head? That must have been taken from reading about these magazines and everything. Taken the place like that head hunted.
It's almost as if something emerged, a crack in Gein's psychology that allowed all this primitive, archaic stuff to pour out in this modern America where all these families were gathered around, watching Leave It to Beaver on TV. You have this guy simultaneously in this little hellhole of a house, dressing in the victim's skin and so on.
What would you do with the sexual parts? I wouldn't ignore it during the thing.
The question arises as to why does Gein or any offender like him keep doing it over and over again? And the answer is it's part of what arouses them sexually, and the sexual instinct itself is strong. The fact that Gein kept doing it shows how strong the compulsion was, how strong the urge was to do it over and over and over again. And if he didn't get caught, he would have continued to do it until he got arrested.
When I listen to the tapes, there's the researcher in me that's interested at an intellectual level about learning more from the actual words of a killer, describing in detail why they did what they did. So there's a part of me that's just like intellectually fascinated by that. But then there's another part of me that, when I take off the researcher hat, there's an eeriness in hearing somebody seemingly so oblivious to the nature of what they have been doing. Ed Gein doesn't even remember some of the things, or pretends or talks about how he doesn't remember things, right? So the banality of what he's talking about is also really striking.
How long ago did you start, Phil? Like I say, lucky 4 years.
The man is truly very ill. So as you're talking to...
So, that kind of explains it well, especially in the last part with the previous guy that was talking. It's very interesting to research these cases because you really can't wrap your mind around how or why do these people do what they do? What causes them to do that? Yeah, there's usually childhood trauma and SA early in their life, animal abuse, whatever, but it is just crazy how the human mind works. And I mean, psychology is still improving to this day. I mean, shoot, I don't think they'll ever figure out why serial killers kill the way they do, especially in this gruesome of a manner as it is. So, in the end, it's a messed up story. Ed Gein was smart enough to know right from wrong. He should have been sent to prison, but I mean, he was sent to a mental institution instead. It is what it is. He's dead anyways. But either way, it's very interesting to see this outlook on life. So that is the end of this episode. Who knows what I'll cover next week? We'll see. Maybe I'll do another serial killer. But the focus of this episode, everyone focuses so much on Jeffrey Dahmer and Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy. Those are like the main popular serial killers out there. Ed Gein really isn't focused on much, even though he has a shit ton of movies based on his story. So that's what this podcast is about, though. Releasing the stories that people really have never heard of before. We're trying to do uncommon things on the Night Crew. So we will see you next week. I will be solo again, but we will make it a fun one. Have a good night.
So if you enjoyed today's podcast, please follow us on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at The Night Crew. That is capital T and then HE, capital NITE, capital KREW. That is The Night Crew. Thank you guys. We really appreciate all of your help and all of your support. And we will see you next week. Thank you and have a good day.